It all started pretty normally, you know? I was helping my mom decorate the house for Halloween, like we do every year. My mom loves this holiday, like, to the point where it's almost over the top. She loves filling the yard with skeletons, pumpkins, and those fake spider webs. It's almost like she wants our house to be the scariest in the neighborhood. That year, we decided to dig out some old decorations that were stored in the attic. The thing is, up until then, I had never had to go up there alone. The attic had always felt kind of weird to me. You know, those places you avoid without really knowing why. But anyway, I didn't have a choice. My mom was busy downstairs, so I went up by myself. I grabbed the ladder, climbed up, and pushed open that little wooden hatch that creaked every time someone touched it. When I poked my head up, the smell of dust made me wrinkle my nose. Everything felt so quiet, you know? A heavy silence, the kind that makes you feel like you're being watched, even when no one's there. I started looking for the boxes of decorations, moving things around, when suddenly I heard it, a faint noise, almost unnoticeable, but it was there, like a scratching sound, or maybe something shifting in the darkest corner of the attic. I froze for a second, trying to figure out what it was. But then I thought, it's probably just the house making noises, or maybe a rat. I took a deep breath, got back to work, but that uneasy feeling didn't go away. The attic, which had just been a place where we stored old junk, suddenly felt much more sinister, like there was something there waiting. I grabbed the boxes and came down as fast as I could, trying to shake off that feeling. I went back to the living room, helped my mom put up the decorations, and that was that, right? Job done. But that weird feeling, the idea that I wasn't alone up there, it stuck with me for the rest of the day. Little did I know that was just the beginning, but the really strange stuff started that night. I was trying to sleep, but you know when sleep just won't come? I kept tossing and turning in bed until I heard it again. Those noises. This time it was clearer. It wasn't just scratching. It sounded like footsteps. Light footsteps, like someone was walking up there in the attic. I lay there for a while, trying to ignore it, thinking, it's just the house, everything's fine. But the footsteps kept going. And worse, they seemed to be getting closer, like whatever was making the noise was moving directly above my room. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. Who hasn't heard a strange noise in the middle of the night and thought it was something way scarier than it actually was, right? But these sounds, they wouldn't stop. They kept going, slow, steady, like someone calmly walking around up there. I got out of bed, went to the door of my room, and listened more closely. The quiet of the whole house made those noises seem even louder. They sounded like footsteps, not too heavy, but definite. I stood there, thinking about whether I should go up and check it out. My mind started creating 1,000 scenarios, from a giant rat to, a burglar who somehow got in without us noticing. But then I thought, who in the world would choose the attic to hide? I tried to go back to sleep. I forced myself to close my eyes and ignore everything, but sleep just wouldn't come. And the sounds, they seemed more insistent. I barely slept that night, and deep down, I knew I'd have to figure out what was going on up there. But I wasn't prepared for what would happen next. The next day, I was exhausted. The night had been terrible, and all I wanted was for it to stop. But of course, it wasn't going to be that easy. When night came, the noises started again. This time, they started earlier, almost like they were teasing me, challenging my bravery. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I grabbed an old flashlight we had in the house, took a deep breath, and got ready to go up there again. With every step I took up the ladder, my heart pounded faster. When I got to the attic entrance, I hesitated for a second. There it was, the wooden hatch that always creaked, staring back at me like it knew what I was about to do. I pushed open the hatch, and the flashlight's beam cut through the darkness of the attic. Everything looked normal at first glance, just the same stacked boxes and dust everywhere. But then something caught my eye. In the far corner, where the flashlight barely reached, I saw something strange. A pile of blankets, kind of dirty, thrown on the floor. My breath caught for a second. I didn't remember leaving anything like that there. I moved closer, the flashlight trembling in my hand, and that's when I saw it. There were bits of food scattered on the floor, empty chip bags, a nearly empty water bottle, and then I realized I wasn't alone. Someone had been there, and it wasn't long ago. It was like the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what it all meant. A homeless person? Some random stranger? Who could have been living in my attic without us noticing? But before I could think of anything else, I heard a noise behind me. Something falling, a dull thud that echoed through the space. I almost dropped the flashlight, but I quickly turned and aimed the light in the direction of the sound. And that's when I saw it, for a second, a shadow moving quickly towards the back of the attic, disappearing among the boxes. I didn't wait to see more. I rushed down the ladder, almost tripping, and slammed the hatch shut with all the strength I had. My heart was pounding so fast I thought I might pass out right there. I ran to my mom, out of breath, trying to explain what I had seen, but the words came out all jumbled. All I could think about was one thing. There was someone up there, and now we knew it. After I told my mom everything, she tried to calm me down, but I could tell she was getting nervous too. At first, she thought I was exaggerating, or maybe that it was just some animal that had gotten into the attic. But then, that same night, the noises started again. Only this time, they weren't just light footsteps. It sounded like someone was dragging something heavy, like they were trying to move something big up there. The whole house seemed to echo with those sounds. My mom stopped what she was doing and looked at me, and at that moment, I knew she was scared too. "This isn't rats," I whispered to her, and she just nodded, silently agreeing. We decided we couldn't ignore it anymore. It was late, but my mom grabbed the phone and called the police, and I couldn't stop staring at that attic hatch, waiting any second to see it open and I didn't even know what. Maybe a hand appearing, or someone slowly coming down. The wait for the police felt like an eternity. Every minute seemed to drag on, and the noises upstairs kept going like whatever or whoever it was knew we were waiting. When the police finally arrived, my mom quickly told them everything, wasting no time. 2 of them went up to the attic, and my mom and I stayed downstairs, holding our breath, listening to every sound from above. Suddenly, we heard one of the officers shout, not a scream of terror, but of surprise. And then, fast footsteps coming down the stairs. They had found someone, a man. He was dirty, his clothes torn, his face covered in scars, and his eyes wide open, like he'd been living in the dark for a long time. A homeless man, they said. He had been hiding in our attic for weeks, maybe longer, living among our things, eating whatever he could find, hiding during the day, and walking around the attic at night. But the worst part was what the police found among his things. Old notebooks filled with notes about us. He had been watching our family for weeks. He knew our schedules, what we did, even what we watched on TV. Every detail of our lives he had written down. The police took him away, but that sense of security, it never came back. Even with the man in custody, things didn't go back to normal. After the police left and silence filled the house again, my mom and I sat in the living room, not knowing what to do or say. The feeling that someone had been there all along, watching us, messed with our heads in a way that's hard to explain. The days that followed were strange. Every little noise in the house made us jump. Every time I went up the stairs, I felt like the homeless man was still there, watching me, even though I knew he had been taken away. The feeling wouldn't go away. It was like the house had been marked by what happened. That attic, which had just been a storage place for old junk and decorations, now seemed like a place I never wanted to see again. My mom tried to move on, to continue life as before, but I could tell she was different too. She started locking the doors and windows obsessively, checking them 2-3 times before going to bed. And me, I avoided going near the attic entrance. Just thinking about going up there again made my stomach turn. We thought about selling the house, starting over somewhere else. But you know how it is, those things aren't that easy. So we stayed. We kept living there, but nothing was the same anymore. That feeling of safety, that our house was our sanctuary, that was gone. Today, every time I hear a strange noise, even if it's just the wind, my mind goes straight back to that night, to that attic. And sometimes I find myself wondering, what if the man hadn't been discovered? How far would he have gone? What was he planning, if he was planning anything at all? I'll never know. What I do know is that after that experience, I've never been able to feel completely safe again. Not at home, not anywhere. It was Halloween, and I was at a friend's party that was supposed to be the party of the year. You know when everyone really goes all out with their costumes? Yeah, that was the vibe. There was everything. Vampires, witches, zombies, and I had a sort of thrown together costume, but it was fine. The music was blasting, and people were spread out all over the house, talking, dancing, drinking. One of those parties you feel like you're gonna remember for a long time, you know? In the middle of all the excitement, with the lights flashing and people laughing loudly, something caught my attention. A guy in a skeleton costume. Nothing unusual, right? It's Halloween, everyone's dressed up. But this guy had something different. His costume was pretty basic, just one of those black jumpsuits with painted on bones. Nothing special. But his vibe stood out. While everyone else was laughing, drinking, and dancing, he was just there, standing in the corner of the room, just watching. I remember looking at him, thinking maybe he was new, maybe just shy, you know how it is. But I soon realized he wasn't there like everyone else. It was like he was just observing, watching each of us, not mingling, not saying a word. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I figured he was just another weird guy who hadn't warmed up to the crowd yet. After all, it was a big party, and not everyone knew each other, right? But the more I looked at him, the stranger it got. He didn't move, didn't take off his mask, didn't interact with anyone. And you know when someone's presence just makes you uneasy, even if you don't understand why? Yeah, he was making me feel like that. The party was in full swing, but I couldn't get the skeleton guy out of my head. Every time I glanced in his direction, he was there, standing still, that empty stare from the mask fixed on something or someone. I tried to ignore it, went back to chatting with people, but every time I let my guard down, I'd end up looking at him again. And it was always the same, motionless, silent, just watching. At some point, it became too uncomfortable for me. I had to figure out who this guy was. I started asking around, talking to people, asking if anyone knew him. No one did. Most people thought he was just someone who had been invited by someone else, but no one could remember seeing him come in or talking to anyone. That only made me more curious. That's when I decided to do something about it. I didn't want to be the party buzzkill, but this was really bothering me. I walked over to him, trying to act casual. As I got closer, I felt this strange chill. The guy didn't move, not even when I was close enough that he should have noticed me. It was like I didn't even exist. So, awkwardly, I asked, "Hey, whose friend are you?" No response. Nothing. He just stood there, staring at me from behind the mask. At that moment, I felt a strange heaviness in the air. I can't explain it. It was like time froze for a second, and it was just me and that skeleton staring at each other. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just ignore it, but also, how do you deal with someone who seems like they're not really there? I was starting to lose my patience. The skeleton guy was still standing there, staring at me, and I couldn't tell if he was trying to be funny or if something was actually wrong with him. I decided to get a friend, Pedro, because this was getting too weird to handle alone. "Pedro, do you know this guy here?" I asked, pointing at the skeleton. Pedro looked at him and shrugged. "Never seen him before, what about you?" he replied. "But yeah, it's weird. Way too weird." That's when we decided to get the host of the party. By this time, a few others had started noticing something was off too. The lively, fun atmosphere was beginning to get a bit tense. We found our friend Ricardo, who was in the kitchen grabbing more drinks, and told him about the. After the skeleton guy disappeared, the party turned into something else. The music was still playing, the lights were still flashing, but the energy had completely shifted. It was like everyone was just waiting for something, or someone. That carefree, fun vibe had been replaced by an uneasiness that no one could shake off. People started asking about the skeleton, and soon the rumor that he had vanished without a trace spread. Ricardo, the owner of the house, was visibly unsettled. He tried to calm everyone down, saying that maybe the guy had just left without anyone noticing. But that didn't make sense. The house was packed, and the front door was right in the middle of the party. Someone would have seen him leave. We decided to do a quick search of the house, just to be sure. We went room by room, opening doors, checking the bathrooms, even the backyard. Nothing. No sign of the guy. And with every door we opened and found nothing, the discomfort grew. Because if he wasn't in the house anymore, how did he get out without anyone noticing? I even opened the closet in one of the bedrooms, as if he could be hiding in there. I know it sounds ridiculous, but the situation was so bizarre that any possibility seemed viable. Of course, the closet was empty, just like the rest of the house. When we got back to the living room, the vibe had completely changed. Some people decided to leave early, saying the party wasn't fun anymore. Others were just sitting in silence, looking around, as if they expected the skeleton to show up again at any moment. I couldn't stop thinking about it. There was no way he just disappeared like that. It didn't make sense. The night ended in a way none of us expected. What started as a Halloween party full of laughter and fun ended with a group of friends feeling uneasy, looking around the house as if something was about to happen. Slowly, people started to leave, but that strange feeling lingered. The next morning, our group chat was flooded with messages about the party. Everyone wanted to talk about the skeleton guy. Who was he? How did he show up? And more importantly, how did he disappear like that? No matter how many times we retold the story, it still didn't make any sense. Ricardo, who was pretty shaken up, even asked everyone he had invited if anyone knew of a friend bringing someone else along. Nobody had an answer. Nobody knew the guy, and nobody saw him after that night. For weeks, the story of the skeleton was the main topic among us. But the answers, those never came. We didn't know what he wanted, why he was there, standing at that party, watching us like he wasn't part of anything. And the scariest part was the mystery of how he vanished. And that's what still bothers me to this day. The skeleton guy didn't show up again, of course, but that feeling that he could be nearby never really left me. You know when something strange happens, and even after a long time, you still get chills just thinking about it? That's exactly how I feel every time I think about that night. And whenever Halloween approaches, I can't help but glance over my shoulder, expecting to see that figure standing in some corner, watching me, just like the first time. Because deep down, I know that story isn't over. The air was cold, and the street was almost deserted. Lucas and Sophia walked hand in hand, laughing softly as they reminisced about the moments from the party they had just left. They were in costume, like everyone else that night, but the adrenaline and warmth from the party were already beginning to fade, replaced by a sense of exhaustion. The streets were too quiet, with only a few houses still decorated with pumpkins and colorful lights. Lucas pulled Sophia closer, trying to warm her as they walked along the dimly lit sidewalk. They talked about how fun the party had been, unaware that something sinister awaited them just ahead. Then, as they turned the corner, they saw him. Standing there in the middle of the path was a man. He wasn't very tall, but his rigid posture made him intimidating at first glance. He was dressed in a clown costume, but not the kind of clown you'd see at a children's party. The mask, painted white with an exaggerated smile and dark, hollow eyes, gave off a disturbing aura, as if it was staring straight into their souls. Lucas let out a nervous laugh, trying to break the tension. "It's probably some idiot trying to pull a prank," he said to Sophia. She smiled back, but there was something in her eyes that showed she wasn't as comfortable as she pretended to be. They kept walking, trying to ignore the man, but he didn't move. He just stood there, silently watching them. With every step they took, the discomfort grew. They passed him, but they could feel the clown's eyes burning into their backs. Sophia squeezed Lucas's hand tighter, and he, trying to appear confident, quickened their pace. But then, they heard footsteps echoing behind them. Lucas glanced over his shoulder, expecting to see the clown still standing in the same spot. But no, he was moving. The footsteps, slow at first, now quickened to match their pace. Lucas's heart began to race, and Sophia, already panicked, started to run. He followed her, not daring to look back, too afraid to confront whatever that thing was that was chasing them. They sprinted down the empty streets, the sound of their own footsteps mixing with the sound of the clown's footsteps. They were only a few blocks from Lucas's house, but each corner they turned felt more endless than the last. Their heavy breathing was the only thing Lucas could hear besides those cursed footsteps that wouldn't stop following them. Finally, they saw Lucas's house in the distance. He grabbed Sophia's arm, practically dragging her to the door. With trembling hands, Lucas fumbled to find his keys in his pocket, while Sophia looked desperately behind them, expecting the clown to appear at any moment. When they finally managed to get inside, they slammed the door shut and locked it with all their might, their hearts still pounding with the adrenaline coursing through their veins. Inside the house, the silence was absolute, but the fear remained, as if that clown was still out there, just waiting for the next opportunity. The silence inside the house was almost deafening. Lucas and Sophia stood still for a few seconds, trying to listen for anything outside. Nothing. No sound of footsteps. No noise. Just silence. Lucas tried to steady his breathing as he looked at Sophia, who was still visibly shaken. "I think he's gone," Lucas said, trying to sound confident. But the uncertainty in his voice was clear. He took a few steps toward the window, slowly pulling back the curtain to peek outside. The street looked as empty as before, with no sign of the clown. "It must have been just some stupid prank," he murmured to himself, trying to believe it. Sophia was still standing near the door, hugging her arms as if that could ward off the cold she felt inside. I don't know, Lucas. That didn't feel like a prank. He was following us, and the way he was looking..." Her voice trembled, reflecting the fear she couldn't control. Lucas stepped away from the window and went to her. "Hey, it's going to be okay. We're home now. He can't hurt us here." He tried to smile, but the smile faded when they heard a faint noise coming from outside. A light scratching, as if something was brushing against the door. They exchanged a silent glance, panic rising again. The scratching sound repeated, this time louder, followed by what sounded like muffled laughter. That strange, distorted laughter, as if someone was trying to hold back laughter but couldn't. Lucas felt his stomach turn. He motioned for Sophia to stay quiet as he crept back toward the window, carefully peeking through the curtain. At first he saw nothing, but then, there he was. The man in the clown mask was standing on the porch, staring at the front door. He was still, but the laughter, that disturbing laughter, echoed through the night. Lucas took a step back, fear turning into pure adrenaline. "He's there. He's right on the porch," he whispered, trying to stay calm. Sophia covered her mouth with her hands, tears welling up in her eyes. "What do we do, Lucas? We need to call the police." He nodded, already pulling his phone from his pocket. But just as he started dialing, the sound of glass shattering echoed through the house, coming from the kitchen. They both froze in place. "No, it can't be," Sophia muttered, panic creeping into her voice. "He's inside." The sound of breaking glass hung in the air like a sentence. Lucas and Sophia stood paralyzed for a second, panic making time seem to freeze. "He's inside," Sophia whispered, almost in disbelief. Lucas's heart was pounding so hard that he could barely hear his own thoughts. They needed to act quickly. "Quick, come with me." Lucas grabbed Sophia by the arm, guiding her through the house while trying to keep their steps as quiet as possible. They ran down the hallway, locking themselves inside one of the bedrooms. Lucas shut the door quietly, making sure to turn the key. With trembling hands, he pulled a heavy dresser to try and block the entrance. On the other side of the door, the silence was overwhelming, but that only made everything worse. The silence made every small sound seem like an imminent threat. Sophia was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees, trying to control her breathing to keep from going into full panic. Lucas approached the bedroom window, intending to see if the clown was still outside. But all he could see was the darkness of the night. There was no sign of him. Not outside, not near the window. That meant he was inside. Suddenly, slow footsteps began to echo through the house. It was as if the man was calmly walking, exploring each room, each hallway without any rush. The sound of the footsteps grew closer, and with each step, their fear intensified. Lucas swallowed hard, trying to think of something, anything they could use to defend themselves. His eyes scanned the room until he found a metal lamp. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. "I'll stay here by the door," Lucas whispered. "If he tries to get in, I'll do whatever it takes to stop him. You, just stay quiet, okay?" Sophia nodded, but her eyes were filled with fear. She knew Lucas was trying to be strong, but she also knew they were at a disadvantage. They didn't know who that man was or what he wanted. The only thing they knew was that he was there, and they were trapped. The footsteps grew closer until they stopped right in front of the bedroom door. Lucas gripped the lamp tightly, taking deep breaths to steady the trembling in his arms. The silence that followed was terrifying. No sound, no movement, just silence. Sophia squeezed her eyes shut, trying to ignore the growing fear inside her. Then, the soft sound of knocking on the door made them both jump. 3 slow knocks, followed by that muffled laughter. The same distorted laugh they had heard before. Lucas tightened his grip on the lamp, his muscles tense, bracing for the worst. The doorknob began to turn slowly. He could see the shadow of the man under the door, moving as if preparing to force his way in. The tension in the air was palpable. The silence was suddenly broken by the sound of police sirens echoing down the street. The flashing red and blue lights penetrated through the bedroom window, briefly illuminating the room. The man stopped. The footsteps echoed again, this time moving away quickly. Lucas ran to the window and saw the figure of the clown running off, disappearing into the darkness of the night. When the police finally knocked on the door, Lucas and Sophia were found trembling, but alive. The relief of being safe was fleeting, because the truth was that the man in the clown mask had escaped. The arrival of the police brought a momentary sense of safety. As the officers entered the house, their flashlights scanned every corner, while Lucas and Sophia tried to catch their breath. Their presence was supposed to make them feel secure, but the fear lingered, clinging to their skin like a heavy fog, making the air feel too thick to breathe. The officers searched the house, examined the broken window in the kitchen, and followed the footprints that disappeared into the dark night. There was no sign of the man. He had vanished as quickly as he had appeared. Lucas felt the adrenaline start to wear off, replaced by a deep exhaustion. He looked at Sophia, who was sitting on the living room couch, hugging a blanket as if it could protect her from everything they had just gone through. One of the officers approached, holding a notepad. "Can you tell us what happened, step by step?" he asked, trying to keep his tone calm but professional. Lucas nodded, though his mind was still foggy from the shock. "We were walking home from the party. That's when we saw him, the man in the clown mask. At first, we thought he was just someone messing around, you know? But then he started following us. We ran home, locked the door, but he chased us here. And then he got in." The officer wrote everything down, but the look on his face suggested he had heard similar stories before. He probably thought it was just another Halloween prank that had gone too far. But for Lucas and Sophia, this wasn't a prank. It was real, too real. As the officer continued asking questions, another officer came back from the kitchen, shaking his head at his colleague. "Nothing. He came through the window but didn't leave many clues. Just footprints that disappear at the sidewalk." Lucas felt a knot in his stomach. The man had been so close, and now he was out there somewhere. What was stopping him from coming back? "We'll have a patrol car in the area tonight, but honestly, it doesn't seem like he's coming back. He probably just wanted to scare you," said the officer, trying to reassure them. But Lucas wasn't convinced. There was something about that man, something about the way he had followed them, that didn't feel like just a prank. It was as if he was waiting for something more, something they still didn't understand. After the police left, the house was quiet again. But this time, the silence was more terrifying than ever. Lucas and Sophia were exhausted, but they knew sleep would be impossible. Every little noise, the rustling of the trees outside, the wind against the windows, made their hearts race. Lucas locked all the doors and windows once more, but the feeling of safety didn't return. He sat next to Sophia on the couch, holding her hand tightly. "I know it seems impossible, but I think we need to try to get some rest," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Sophia just nodded, her eyes fixed on the front door, as if expecting the doorknob to start turning again at any moment. Still, she lay down on the couch, and Lucas did the same, the two of them lying side by side, trying to stay awake, but the exhaustion was too strong. Sleep came, but it was light, and they woke up at every little sound, always with the fear that when they opened their eyes, the clown would be standing there, in the middle of the room. But he wasn't, not that night. Still, the fear lingered, constant and suffocating. And even with the house quiet, the image of the man in the clown mask remained burned in their minds. The night dragged on slowly, as if time was playing a cruel trick on them. Lucas and Sophia kept waking up, always with the same feeling that something was wrong, that they weren't alone. But every time they opened their eyes, the house was empty, bathed in silent darkness. When the morning light finally broke through the windows, bringing a bit of warmth and normalcy, the relief was almost immediate. It was as if the presence of that man, or whatever he was, had evaporated with the arrival of day. But the weight of the fear was still there, and the house that had once been a safe refuge now felt cold and strange. Lucas got up first, walking slowly to the living room window. The neighborhood was calm, with neighbors starting their morning routines as if nothing had happened. Cars passing by, people heading to work, kids getting ready for school. Everything seemed so normal, so far removed from the terror they had lived just hours before. Sophia joined him, still wrapped in the blanket. "He's gone. But for how long?" Her voice was hoarse, and there was a sadness in her eyes that Lucas hadn't seen before. She wasn't just talking about the man in the mask. She was talking about the fear that had now become a part of them. Lucas put an arm around her, trying to offer some comfort. "I don't know, but we can't live like this, afraid all the time." He wanted to believe his own words, but the truth was that since the previous night, nothing seemed certain anymore. Throughout the day, their normal routines felt like an attempt to distract themselves. They cleaned the house, picked up the broken glass in the kitchen, called friends and family, trying to avoid the subject. But in every glance they exchanged, there was that unspoken feeling that something wasn't right, as if the danger was still lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike again. In the late afternoon, the police returned for one last check and to talk with the couple. Once again, they confirmed that the man in the clown mask hadn't been found. No leads, no security cameras had caught him on the streets. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. "We'll keep patrolling the area, but honestly, these kinds of cases are usually isolated," said the older officer. "It was probably just someone trying to scare people on Halloween night." Lucas nodded, but the comment didn't bring any relief. When the police left, he closed the door, feeling the weight of being alone again. The house, once a place of safety, now felt filled with shadows. That night, they tried to move on, having dinner together and attempting to watch something on TV, but the tension was there, constant. Every noise from outside, every rustling of the trees, seemed to announce the clown's return. But nothing happened. The night remained quiet, almost too calm, but the fear was a constant presence. Lucas couldn't stop himself from looking out the window every hour, as if expecting to see that figure standing outside again. And Sophia? She could barely sleep. Even with the lights on, what once seemed ridiculous now felt like a necessity. Days passed, and the clown didn't return. But the mystery of who he was and why he had chosen to pursue them that night remained unanswered. Maybe there would never be an answer. Maybe that's what made it all the more terrifying. And so, life returned to normal, at least on the surface. But what happened that Halloween night never left Lucas and Sophia's minds. They knew the clown had gotten away, but the most terrifying part was that, deep down, they also knew he could be anywhere, waiting for the right moment to appear again.